Welcome to the Plan B CRNA podcast. I'm your host, Bobby Jones, and I'm so excited that you're here. The Plan B CRNA podcast is the only show made specifically for nurse anesthetists who are exploring options outside of their traditional career paths. This is the place to expand your mind and your goals as we uncover new ways to produce side income together. Join me for some honest, unscripted discussions with other CRNAs who are transforming their financial lives. This episode is brought to you by On-Call Capital. On-Call Capital is dedicated to educating CRNAs and other healthcare providers about investing outside of the traditional stock market. On-Call Capital also provides opportunities for you, yes, you, to create passive income and generational wealth while also lowering your taxable income through investments in the apartment and alternative investment spaces. If you haven't hit subscribe yet, make sure you do that right now so that you don't miss an episode. Thanks so much for joining me today. And now, on with the show. Welcome to another Provider Spotlight episode of the Plan B CRNA podcast. My guest today loves to think about simple, creative solutions that address healthcare challenges in an effort to do and be better. Kelly Good cares deeply about her patients and her caregiving responsibilities as a CRNA. Kelly was quite happy with her job at a large anesthesia group, caring for elective orthopedic patients at a level 1 trauma center. But an aha moment that she tried desperately to ignore kept returning to her conscience and ultimately prompted further investigation into anesthesia airway taping practice. Soon, Kelcor was born as a medical device company offering clean, single-use taping solutions for anesthesia, emergency medicine, and intensive care unit airway management. Outside of the work-life balance, when there's time to play, Kelly loves to be near the water with her family, her pup, and her friends. Here you'll often find her at her most relaxed with a fishing pole in hand, a song in her heart, and a big smile on her face. I love that so much. And I'm so happy to have you on the show today, Kelly. Thanks for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. This is absolutely my pleasure. I appreciate this opportunity. Thank you.
Absolutely. Well, let's dive right in. Start talking about that aha moment. You know, you had an aha moment. What in the world was that like?
So I've been in practice almost 20 years, and in the years leading up to that aha moment, I was working in an elective orthopedic department within this level 1 trauma center where just the mentality was one where attention to detail was so important. The staff as a whole focused on cleanliness and the trays, and everything was just really, really specific in terms of best patient outcomes. And as a result, the unit had incredible outcomes as a whole for the patients. And so one day when I was in the OR, I realized after intubating a patient, when my hands were kind of wet, I reached back to grab a roll of tape, and it was the same roll of tape I had used on the previous patient. And in that moment, I thought, oh my goodness, what are we doing? My hands are wet. They probably were wet the last time. It's just I'm seeing it now, and this is probably not what we need to be doing for our patients. But then I immediately thought, well, maybe it's just me. Maybe I'm the person who's like, maybe I should have been doing something differently. And it just started a kind of curiosity that one thing led to another. And before I knew it, here we are.
Awesome. Well, and everyone listening to this has been around airway devices. So why do you think it's taken so long for these anesthesia taping methods to, and the devices involved to catch up to modern medicine?
I think that's an interesting question, and one that I definitely think about all the time. Like, am I making a mountain out of a molehill? It's sort of my self-check, because at the end of the day, a roll of tape is such a simple device, and I'm advocating for something seemingly much more complicated. So it's the space that I'm constantly in check with. But I think in that same light, it's become a standard of care just by its own natural evolution. And so therefore we've kind of just taken it upon ourselves to do it without actually ever thinking about it. And as the rest of the OR has evolved with fancy and rules that pertain to cleanliness and everything, I think the roll of tape is just silently sitting in the background with all of our attentions being taken other places. And it's like the snake in the grass. It just sort of stays there and is not shouting for us to pay attention to it. And as I've learned more and more and more, it's well justified that we pay attention to it. And so that's kind of, again, how we got here. But I think it's just because it's always been that way. That's why it's still that way. It's a standard of care that we've just not had a reason to go back and address, because there's nothing that can specifically link it to negative outcomes, if you will.
Well, and that makes sense, because, I mean, there's not a whole lot of studies out there linking taping methods to actual problems. However, I'm sure there's a lot out there that talks about specific things that are on the tape that you're using. So I'd love if you don't mind getting into that a little bit.
Yes. So, in our practice of anesthesia, especially during induction, where there's so much going on, there's just a lot of cross-contamination, a lot of activity, that a lot of what we're doing, just even in a case in general, it's hard to know where our highest risk moments are. We've certainly looked a lot, or the research has looked a lot at IV injection practices and hand washing practices and clean, dirty setups. And so it's hard to just zero in on one unique thing. But to your question, tape has been implicated in its own merit, not only for the contaminants that are widely growing on it, but also it's from dressings, from bandages, have created and been responsible for significant distress and negative outcomes for patients, whether it's neonatal patients in an ICU or oncology patients. There was a teenager where tape has actually been implicated in negative outcomes in other settings, not necessarily the OR. Mm-hmm. And it just, to me, I think when I think about, I'm a real practical person, and I think about common sense, we know of the secretions and potentially even blood, whether we're aware of it or not, from our intubations that could land on tape. And it's not until we see dirt or hair or something more obvious do we say, oh gosh, the tape is dirty. But I think in just the saliva and things of that nature, our hands, we know that there's bacteria, fungus, viruses moving on the tape, onto the surfaces, onto the patient, onto us. Like, it's definitely happening just because we know it's there.
Well, it's kind of funny, because I think about, when my own career, and, if something was wrong with a device or whatever, we wouldn't think twice about pitching it in the trash. I mean, like, you're taught to do, like, you have to do this. If something's contaminated, you have to throw it away.
Right.
Yet we will cling to this 10-cent roll of tape like we are saving some massive amounts of money here. And it's kind of backwards when you actually stop to think about it. But there's so much, and I guess I was used to, when you're in the operating room, you're kind of conditioned to think that everything has been looked at already before you got there. Like, there's a reason why everything is done in the certain fashions that it is. Right. And so you kind of just adopt that mentality of, well, I'm not here to reinvent the wheel. Like, somebody else has already thought about these things. And so, but the fact that you're like, okay, well, no, actually, this hasn't been thought about, and you found something. And I think that's pretty remarkable. But I wonder why, though. I don't know if it's just the mentality we have to try and save some money, but I don't know why we have such a problem with, throwing a roll of tape in the garbage and just getting a new one.
I wonder sometimes if it just comes out of our roots as nurses, just bedside nursing, in terms of maybe how we all started as nurses. I wonder about it too, because to your point, we cling to that tape and we'll reuse it down to the end of that roll. And also, to your point about thinking about things, that's exactly kind of, again, what is the gut motivator, the heart motivator for me in all of this. Because when I think about, again, as a proud CRNA who's very proud of the work that we do, when I think about this standard of care, I just know it's not consistent with who we are as providers. It doesn't feel consistent with the degree of care that we give our patients as a whole, as a profession. And so, to your point, I'm trying to start to think about it. But it's also hard because, I'm not here to judge what we do either. I'm just sort of here to help everyone scratch their heads and say, okay, and rally the troops. Come on, guys, we can do this, So
yeah. Well, so let's talk a little bit more about your business. So you have this idea or this aha moment.
Yes.
So, but there's a lot that has to happen from then to now when you have actual products that you're offering. So what was that process like? Did you start with trying to develop the product first, or did you go out and say, okay, well, I'm going to have a company and this is what we're going to do, and then you go into the research and development phase from there? What did that look like for you?
So for 2 years, I just feel like that aha moment marinated in my conscious. I wanted to substantiate kind of my emotional response. So I went to the research. I wanted to validate what we were doing at our practice center as something that everybody else was doing. I wanted to look into whether or not somebody had already thought of this and maybe it didn't take shape. So, and at the same time, I was trying to figure out, well, what could we use as an alternative? Because I get asked all the time, what about just a short roll of tape? What about just a roll of tape that's only as long as what we need for the intubation? And I think that those short rolls of tape are already in existence. And what happens is instead of 5 uses, we use them 3 times. So it's that behavioral conservation component that makes it difficult not only to hold ourselves accountable, but then to enforce, and I don't mean rules enforce, but enforce just kind of as a professional upgrade. And so then I started thinking, okay, what's this going to look like? And so when we started the company 2 years later in 2017, I had some really good foundational work to build on, both in idea creation and then substantiation, as I mentioned. So my business partner is well versed in startups and the operations side of beginning a company. I am not. My expertise in anesthesia is something she doesn't have. So recognizing those complements, we began the march together. And it started out with actual tape and scissors and sewing machines and like arts and crafts 101. Mm-hmm. I mean, we created so many great ideas. And then we went out to manufacturers, and turns out tape isn't so easy to manufacture. So that's been like one of the biggest moments. You think something so simple would be so easy to reinvent. And it turns out it's not, because a lot of the ideas that we have had are just, from what we could find out, are just not manufacturable. I still think they're great ideas, but I would have to make them at home with my own sewing machine. So by necessity, the idea was made to evolve, not only for its ability to be manufactured, but also then in a cost competitive price, and then also at a way that met a standard that I felt like as anesthesia providers we wanted, in terms of how it worked on the face, the confidence we could have in it as a securing device, how it was handled on the skin. And so we tried to take all of what we had learned and come up with really the most practical and adaptable and secure and manufacturable solution that could also be cost competitive and reasonable in the marketplace. Because ultimately, I feel like, the vision would be that these types of devices would become a standard amongst all of medicine, and just a need for a simple roll of tape would no longer be necessary.
Yeah.
That we could actually craft devices that really address our needs.
Yeah. Well, so there are 2 ways we can take this. I want to hit them both. So
okay.
I'll let you choose, but I want to hear more about your products and everything that you have there. But I also want to hear more about the collaboration process that you kind of started to touch on there, with your partner, but also with the anesthesia community in general, because you've had a lot of input from other people in the anesthesia community as well.
Absolutely.
So I'll let you take it from there. Product, collaboration, go.
Okay, so our product, I'll summarize really briefly so we have two products currently, the Casey airway taping system and the Casey iTape. The Casey airway taping system was designed with the intention, very thoughtful intention, of creating a device that applies everything I knew about anesthesia to meet our need. And so it is adaptable to all airway devices, a 6.0 endotracheal tube and higher, an LMA, an iGel, whether it's a nasal ray, an oral ray. It was really important to me that one device fit all sizes, recognizing that down the road we can fine tune, but just to come into the market that we could kind of do it all. And so that's our airway device. And then accompanying that is the iTape, which was designed again on the premise of when we put our patients to sleep, we often seal their eyes, and this would allow for a complete elimination for a need for a dirty roll of tape. So those are our two products. We have the airway tape is made out of silk tape, what we think of as silk tape. It's made in such a way, though, that it's heavier. So it kind of allows that traction that we like to feel on a roll of tape. So I tried as best as we could to recreate that tactile sense that you get from a roll of tape when you're kind of securing it. And then the iTape is a sort of an upgrade with a wound care type adhesive material or barrier dressing that's thicker than Tegaderm, but not quite as sticky. And it's designed in such a way that it goes on and off in a one-way direction so that the eyelids don't have to be pulled and stretched and contorted in order to put it on or take it off. So those are our two products. Like I said, they came from a long line of iterations that were, to your point, going back to your other question, that came out of multiple trials. We went by way of taking our ideas to manufacturers, and that through that process of literally traveling around the country to find a well-fitting manufacturer, which we do have here in the United States. They're an incredible company. We feel really fortunate to be able to work with them. But they with their engineering expertise and tape manufacturing and converting expertise, were able to help marry our ideas with something that was achievable. And then as that evolved, there were boots on the ground that I had who were willing to give it a go and were really good about coming back with really constructive feedback. And so the marrying of kind of, consumer CRNA input with manufacturing expertise, with intention, kind of over, I would say almost 2 to 3 years, kind of got us to this point now where we're really rolling out a product that we feel like ticks a lot of boxes. I mean, it might not tick every last one, but I feel really good about the boxes that it can tick. So I'm excited to share it and have, people give it a go.
Cool. Well, so let's talk a little bit about, going back to kind of what we were going with earlier, the resistance.
Okay.
What kind of resistance have you met along the way, not just from providers, but, from the people that you have to talk to get these things into operating rooms or into ambulances? Or is there a specific route you've taken? Are you dealing more with hospitals? Are you dealing more with, like ambulance services? What's that looked like for you?
So again, it's sort of a constantly learning endeavor. And so we have a large audience. We have providers, we have hospitals, we have distributors. There's all different types of people that we could be simultaneously appealing to. And that's just inherent to medical devices. And as a tiny company in a massive sea of massive sharks, kind of figuring out how to navigate all of that is also part of our learning. So to address your question, I have always, with my rose-colored glasses, I I idealize the idea that this is sort of a nurse anesthesia led endeavor, just, because we're at the bedside most often, I feel like, looking at the needs of our anesthesia patients. And this just feels like it comes out of that nursing. It's born from nursing, that side of anesthesia. But the reality of it, to come into a hospital, is it needs to meet the needs of, whether it's OR managers or anesthesia group, administrators or hospital supply chain people. And so we are working through networks to create those conversations. And it's just a constant effort at awareness. And I think that that's part of the learning. It's just part of the learning. And that's really kind of where we are right now. And so I would have to probably follow up more with the insights gained, because we're kind of learning them in real time right now. And COVID makes it hard, along with every other thing, just the ability to get in the door. And I think this is the type of product that does best when it's personally shared. So we were at the Tennessee State anesthesia meeting, and it was awesome to see, with live demonstrations, the enthusiasm and excitement of the sRNAs, the kind of aha moments of the cRNAs, the interest of the educators in terms of applying evidence-based medicine or evidence-based science to nurse anesthesia practice, so it kind of, but so often we don't have that opportunity.
Yeah, no, I understand that, and that, I remember that excitement from going to conferences and seeing new devices, and I would bring something back and, it's, you're automatically shot down. It's like, well, no, we don't need that.
Right.
Well, you're like, I tried, like I'm just a staff, anesthetist. I'm not, one of the high ups or anything. So, we
get a lot of that. Yeah, we do. We're giving away a lot of samples. We're just trying to create a lot of awareness. We want people to put their hands on it. We want people to give it a go. Like I said, we want to start conversations, and then we're just sort of going about it every opportunity we can.
Well, what's been the most rewarding part for you?
I think the reward comes from utilizing an expertise and applying it to something that is well-intentioned for the profession, I think, and the patient. So it feels good to work towards something that might have a means to make a positive ripple, whatever that looks like. I think about often as a nurse anesthetist, my care is often driven from putting myself in the place of the patient. And I think often about, if the patient was aware that this was our standard of care, I don't think they would feel really good. And so it feels good to me to be working towards something that is good for our patients. But I'll be quick to say, it takes a team, and there's been a lot of, you got to have a good support system, because there's always a checks and balance, and a lot of learning, as we talked about, just along the way. Yeah.
Well, and this, when I think about these, all these folks that I've interviewed that have started their own company, that have created an actual product, it's the days are long, but the years are short. And you're going to be looking back 5 years from now, and this thing will have really taken off. And, there's a lot of value, I feel like, that you're offering. But speaking of value, what kind of advice do you have for other people who may have an idea of their own, or they're looking to get into this side of things more so than just being a practitioner?
So I think it's great. I think if you have an idea that continues to kind of stir within you, I think you won't ever know till you go after the pursuit of it. But I also think it's important to surround yourself with people who can really be honest with you about what it looks like. We ask a lot of questions. There's several cRNA innovators that are out there working on incredible projects, and they have been incredible resources to me, and that collaboration is invaluable. So there's no reason to go reinventing the wheel if there's somebody out there who can show you the way. And I think that spirit exists in us, certainly in what I've found as our CRNA group. So I would encourage people to ask questions, lean into the resources, surround themselves with a realistic picture of what this will look like, and continue to self-check. There's nothing about it that's easy, but I think when you're pursuing something that feels really important to you, there's great opportunity for it to be very rewarding, even when it's difficult, because the growth along the way, the personal growth, the insights gained, the humility, if you will, like, I think it's all good for us in terms of the long game of life. And so I wouldn't discourage anybody from doing it at all, but I would definitely say to, inform yourself as best as you can, and then move forward with a awareness that it will probably and more than likely evolve. Like, where you start might not be where you end up, and that's okay. Being open to that is just as important as how it looks along the way.
Yeah. I love that advice, because and I think that's for any business owner. It doesn't matter if you actually have a physical product that you're putting out there. It doesn't matter that you're inventing something. The ability to evolve is, the world is all about change, and
Right.
and it's changing all the time. My business did not look at all the way I intended it to look when I first started about 2 years ago. So, I think that's just the story for all people who are looking at getting into the business side of things and becoming an entrepreneur.
For sure.
So,
and I think there's a lot of, in medical devices, there's a lot of ways to go. And we just started with the idea of taking our idea out there. But I do think there's probably ways where ideas can be handed off and ideas can be, and so I can't speak as much to that, but there are a lot of avenues that for folks who are interested in medical devices to collaborate, whether they take it by way of an independent company or they partner with something that's already in existence. And I just want to put that out there, just because it occurred to me, we didn't elect to go that way, but that was definitely an option. That was just not how we did it.
Yeah, and I've heard that from other folks too, that you develop a product, you go through this whole process, and it's your baby, and then somebody comes in and says, "Hey, we'll buy that off you," and so then you come to that intersection where it's like, okay, well, how much more effort do I want to put into this product? That's been my baby for so long. Do I want to hand that off to somebody else and let them now take care of that precious cargo? Or do I want to put in the work and the hours and put in the energy to push forward some, this thing that it takes time for other people to get.
Right.
So,
that's right. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, this has been a great conversation. I've really enjoyed spending some time with you. And before we wrap up here, I want to give folks a chance to get a hold of you. How can they do that?
I think the best thing to do is visiting our website, which is Kelcor Tape, KELCOR tape.com. There's an opportunity there to request free samples or just reach out to us and learn more. I can always be reached via email, which is simply Kelly, KELLY @kelcortape.com. I'm here to share. We have accounts on LinkedIn. We have them on Facebook. Following along there are always great places of engagement that we're continuing to kind of utilize as best we can. As I mentioned, I was sort of just a day-to-day, not just day, but I was a day-to-day practitioner who was, just going about my business in the OR. And then here we are. And so I'm simultaneously learning the great value of social media, but we're there and people can definitely find us there as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being here today. This has been a real treat.
Thank you. I've really enjoyed it. Thank you so much, Bobby. This is wonderful. I appreciate it.
Some of the coolest innovations are just simple solutions for simple problems. Kelly happened to look around her environment and spot a problem that needed solving. Kudos to her for being bold enough to carry that thought process forward to a new solution. What kind of problems are each of us faced with in our daily life that could do with a makeover? I also really appreciated Kelly's last point about not being tied to the end result, but being willing to grow and learn along the journey. One of the most challenging things about being a business owner is being willing to adapt. But working in healthcare gives us a unique skill set that really sets us up for success outside of the hospitals. Whether we're going through medication shortages, equipment changes, or a new virus variant, we are constantly adapting to a rapidly changing environment all the time. It makes sense that we could do that outside of the OR too. That's going to do it for the show today. Be safe and take care of each other out there. Thank you so much for joining me for another episode of the Plan B CRNA podcast. If you haven't already subscribed and reviewed the show, I'd be honored if you took the extra time. It really helps to expand our reach and get the word out about the show. If you're a CRNA who is interested in sharing your story on our podcast, I'd love to have you. Please email me at bobby@oncallinvestments.com for more information. This episode was brought to you by On-Call Capital. They are dedicated to helping providers like you develop passive income and generational wealth through investments in the apartment and alternative investment spaces. Feel free to check out their website at www.oncallinvestments.com and subscribe to their free educational email series. You can find On-Call Capital on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. You can also check out our YouTube page, where you'll find all of the show episodes along with other educational videos. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you on the next episode.